Hello, I'm Dustin with Kruger Instruments and Kruger's Training Academy. Today we're going to go through the USC 10th edition testing procedures for the double check valve. We'll be using the Kruger Instruments TK2. It's a 2-valve test kit. High is on the left, low is on the right. We have the line pressure gauge, 0 to 15 scale, accurate to plus or minus 0.2 psi. For USC, they have a 5-3 or a 2-valve arrangement in their book. You're only going to be using your high bleed for anything to do one hose testing. All of USC stuff is one hose testing for the double check PVB, SVB. The RP does have the 3 hose testing with the 2-valve test kit. Feel free to check out our other videos involving the RP and the other testing, the other assemblies. For USC, you also have a few extra things. You have a bleed off arrangement. They call it the bleed off valve arrangement. Some people call it compensating tees, whatever you want to call it. And a short clear hose. Depending on the class you're in, if you're out in the field, you might have a more elaborate short clear hose. This is all you really need. You just have to get it above the test cock reading. There are specific specs for these. We just use I think it's 5/8 ID, something. It should be able to fit onto a 1/4 inch flare adapter. We also have a high hose and a screwdriver. For the double check, there's 4 test cocks, 1, 2, 3, 4. They should go from inlet to outlet. Some of the RPs, they might be in a different arrangement in the field, where like 2 and 3 are flipped. Double checks, you're almost never gonna see that. I would say probably never. Also 2 shutoffs, inlet shutoff, also called shutoff number 1. Outlet shutoff, also called shutoff number 2. For when you're about to start the test, you think, oh, I'm going to start flushing test cocks. No, the first step, notify, identify, inspect, observe. That has to do with notifying the customer that you're going to shut their water off. Depending on the course you're in, they might just want you to say those 4 words. If you're taking a test, a lot of times that's the case. Some proctors might be like, oh yeah, like, what are you observing? And there are like elaborate versions of exactly what you're supposed to be observing or notifying. Next, you're going to open and close the test cocks. For some other procedures, if you're doing like the ASSE1 hose, you actually don't have the extra bleed offs and you flush the test cocks a different way. For USC, you just have to flush all of them. I believe they like you to go 1, 2, 3, 4, but you don't have to leave anything running. You just open and close the test cocks. So open and close 1, 2, 3, 4. It says install appropriate fittings if applicable. If you notice, this rig, it was 1/4 inch regular raw end, and then we put adapters on it. In the field, you're going to want to put your adapters on at this point. Sometimes they are just raw end. A lot of them actually have them manufactured inside. This is a Zern one. Typically the Zern ones are just raw end. If you're in a proctored exam, they might say like, oh, install your test fittings. You got to like say the words, maybe move your hands like this. Depends on the proctor. Some proctors don't really care. Close all needle valves. It's a 2-valve kit, so you only have 2 needle valves. Just close high and low. You attach your bleed off tee to number 2 test cock. The bleed off on the standard procedures really doesn't come into effect. You just have to put it on. If you're looking at our troubleshooting videos, there's quite a few extra steps. They call them diagnostics that you have to prepare for specifically for the exams. But also, we're just going to put it on and then use it in the test. Attach your short clear hose to test cock 3. If the test cocks are coming out sideways, you might have to have some kind of 90 on it. For us, just in the classes, we just have like a short clear hose that you put on. Make sure it's snugly put on. If it's like halfway on or whatever like that, the water will totally leak out the bottom, so make sure it's like pushed all the way to the bottom. Attach your high hose to the high side of your gauge and attach to the bleed off tee. Open test cock 2. They don't really say how fast or slow. I would recommend always doing like kind of a 1-second turn. If you have water in the low side of the gauge, it'll spray you, so be careful with that. Next, you're going to bleed it, so you just open and close high bleed. Get all the water out of the gauge. The water in the gauge or the hoses can totally affect your test. The water will like dissolve in, or the air will dissolve in the water, and then it creates water hammer and stuff. So you want to make sure It's like a stream of water all the way through your gauge. Next, you bleed the test, or you open and close test cock 3 to fill the tube. Some one hose testing, you don't have to have the tube. For USC, you do. If you have a tube and you're utilizing it for that reason, you want to make sure that it's all the way full of water. Close your outlet shut off. Close your inlet shut off. Make sure your gauge is totally level. You want your bleed and everything totally level with the top of this hose. First, you're going to get your first reading is actually your static line pressure. So 40 on your line pressure gauge. So you write that down on your test report. You might run into where your proctor doesn't even have that on your test report. We do, so we're just going to write it on there. Next, you get your check valve 1 reading. So make sure your gauge is level. Open test cock 3. I'm getting 3.2. The way the gauge is done, the larger lines are 1, and then some of them are numbered, so like 3, 6, 9, 12. And all the tiny little ones are 0.2. So if you look at your gauge, it's reading 3.2. If it's in between the 2 little lines, you say that it's in between it. So if it was in between 3.2 and 3.4, you'd say it's 3.3. So I got 3.2, and it's closed tight. We can also determine that shut-off 2 is not leaking when you do this test. If it was leaking, the water in your little clear hose would go down. So we can say shut-off 2 is tight. You can also consider shut-off 1 tight, because if it wasn't, water would be spitting out of the clear tube. So if water continuously runs out of the clear tube, it means shut-off 1's leaking. If your line pressure gauge starts going down, you can say shut-off 2 is leaking. Technically, you should be testing shut-off 2 on check valve 2's reading, because check valve 2 would actually hold that pressure. But we already marked it, so we'll assume that's marked. Next, we're going to do the check valve 2 test. Shut your test cocks. For USC, it says to remove all of your equipment. Or first you open shut off 1 to reestablish pressure. Some of the other one hose testing procedures, they say to loop 1 and 2. It's not a bad idea. A lot of times these are on fire lines and they're like huge preventers. So in the field, if you shut the inlet shut off and then you go to open it, so you have like full line pressure and then like basically nothing on the other side, or 1 psi or whatever it is, it becomes very hard to open the valve. Like you might have to get like a cheater bar and like a 3-foot wrench. You shouldn't be doing that. What happens is you have full line pressure on one side, 0 on the other side, and when you go to open it, it'll like scrape the side of the valve against this. If you have a big gate valve, a lot of times for fire systems, you'd have to be OS and Y, meaning like you can, it's an indicator valve, so like if the thing's all the way up, you know it's open, all the way down, you know it's closed. If that's the case, you can also just loop your hoses around to reestablish pressure before you open the valve, or you can just use the loop. But that is not actually in the USC book, so if you're doing an exam or something, you don't want to do that, you just want to open the shut off. It says remove all equipment and then put all the equipment back. So you have the bleed off valve on test cock 3, short clear hose on test cock 4, attach your hose, open test cock 3, open and close, high bleed, open test cock 4, to put, not all the way, just to fill this tube with water. Again, you want the water in the tube before you do the test. Close inlet shut off valve. Make sure your gauge is level with the top of your clear hose. So you have everything open, full line pressure to the gauge, and then this, you just open this to bleed the pressure through the check valve. So we're getting more or less the same number, 2.9 on check valve 2, 2.8. For this is a one hose test, you want to make sure all your stuff is completely tight. So now I'm getting 2.6. Sometimes it does settle a little bit. It shouldn't be leaking through though. Now it's 2.4. You want to wait until it's done settling as well. It seems like it is kind of settling at 2.4 now. So we'll say check valve 2, close tight at 2.4. So we can go ahead and say this assembly passed. You have check valve 2 and check valve 1, both having more than 1.0 psi. Shut off 1 and 2 are closed tight, so you say it passed. Now you break it down, close test cocks 3 and 4, remove all equipment. Very important, you want to open shut off 1 first. If you open shut off 2 first, it creates a situation where you might have some backflow. Then you open shut off 2. So that concludes the test. If you're interested in the pressure test kit or the Kruger Instruments TK2, definitely check out the website for that, krugerinstruments.com. But if you made it this far, I guess this channel has added some value to what you're doing. Please take a second to like, subscribe, comment. If you have any questions or you noticed an error in what I did, definitely comment. A lot of times people will watch the video and then they have the same question, so they comment, and then the comment's already there, so they get the information a little quicker. But take a chance to like, subscribe, and thank you for joining us.